Today's video is focused on game developers, as I occasionally do, but I know there's been a lot of videos about the other stuff lately. But today has to do with the discussions going on online. And this is not an argument against or criticism against this person. He's a very exceptionally capable game developer, done a lot of great games, nothing but respect. This is more trying to add to the conversation another lens on for consideration of viewers. But again, it's not an argument against or criticism of this person. But there's a concern about platform lock-in, that if you learn Unity or learn you name it, that you're stuck on that platform forever. That you can't take what that is and apply it to something else. And we've been hearing this this fictional Chicken Little problem for the 20 years I've been making games, right? I mean, people used to fret about they were locked in on Flash, that they were locked in on Objective-C and iPhone. When I got started programming games and was using assembly, I was locked in on a certain kind of processor architecture that used that kind of assembly. When I was doing C and C++, my projects were so rooted in graphics technologies that only worked on Windows that I was kind of married to that operating system, way that within that programming language was a lot of extra effort and work and time at that time period to port it to other platforms. That every step of the way, there's always been technologies and platforms and things that we use that they crumble out from underneath us. And the thing is, they're going to. That is always, always, always the case. But it didn't stop that from being at the cornerstone of my career, both reaching a lot of players and making a decent amount of money to live in downtown San Francisco for a number of years, from technologies which at the time were platform specific, or were proprietary, or were something which was not an evergreen technology. And I think that the more important lessons to pull from it, from the tweeted hand, which again I'm not pointing it out in terms of not framing it here in the picture, because I don't want this to be about the person, but part of the message really has to do with just in making sure that the level at which you're thinking about it isn't really focused on learning the tool. And I think that that's where there's absolutely this valid, worthwhile conversation to be having about making sure that we don't confuse, and I've met Ron's pointed before, that we don't confuse learning the tool with learning to use it well. In the same way as if you went to a writing workshop and that writing workshop's focus was, here's how to use Microsoft Word, right? You should leave angry. You should leave angry from that situation, because that's not the objective of writing, is to use Microsoft Word. Now you have to be able to use it to fumble around some basic things in it, or you can't get the ideas out of yourself. But it's not about that technology. And the important bit is, Unity represents, just as an example, and C# certainly, many patterns and concepts and practices that are pretty widely employed throughout different game engines, throughout self-made game engines, throughout the game industry for some 30, 40 some odd years of iterative development and borrowed practices from best practices for how we shape an editor, how we shape our code, how we develop our programs. So a lot of those same concepts, if or when Unity no longer supports the platform we want to reach, if or when they start changing their licensing model to no longer make sense for you, you're not hosed, starting over from scratch. You are picking up and learning the next thing, which you will be super capable and ready and able to do from the experiences that you get from building with the tools that at the time are dominant in terms of their reach, in terms of their power, in terms of their speed. Now, as I often like to point out and teach as well, that still doesn't mean it's necessarily the best first platform to learn on. And this has nothing to do with but platform lock-in. This has more to do with just having a solid core foundation of the concepts, which again I think is really at the center of this conversation. If we stop focusing on a single or a particular platform lock-in as part of the topic and really look at how we get a generalized concept of it, one of the ways I've found that helpful for people to get more use out of Unity, to get even better results out of if they're going on to use Unreal or 500 Game Maker or other tools that carry a lot of the heavy lifting for them, can begin from writing pure code programs and even still building on sort of an existing default lattice work of support within a browser for JavaScript. Canvas, what I used to be processing when I was in grad school. Before that, we would use C, but we would use it with a library that kind of did so much lifting, like Allegro, whatever. SDL was even still more low level than we needed, because it really just had more to do with making sure we were thinking spatially about thinking numerically about the spatial relationships, about realizing the degree to which we have control as the author of a software program about these very fundamental concepts about space and time and collisions and motion in a way that, like, if all you ever do is interact at the surface level of any engine, this isn't criticism of any particular engine, then they can wind up just sort of taking for granted that that's just how the world functions, that's just how things work, when it doesn't have to be. And there's ways, once you know that that's within your control, and once you understand how simple and straightforward those things are, that you can weave them together. Then you can rewrite them, you can overwrite them, you can do it your way, which occasionally, depending on the game you're building, helps you escape that feel of having like a default template, where for reasons that are hard to put your fingers on, or hard to state what's going on, it can just feel off, or feel wrong, or feel bad. That's the same reason why a presentation that uses a default template for the slides, which I'm guilty of too, sometimes reeks of, you can tell that it wasn't tailored to this topic. It wasn't tailored to the presentation being given today, and occasionally budget justifies that choice. But it's a differentiator between that versus something where it's really clearly been honed to it. And this is also where one of the nice things about modern engines, whether it's Unity or Unreal for that matter, can both be used in a pretty broad range of ways, either for really, really, I'm talking duct tape and staples prototyping, like snap it together, and on the other end, also really dug into and rewriting things like the sound system, like the rendering technology, like the physics engine for your own sort of approaches to these things, in a way that allows you to further optimize to much greater tiers, that further allows you to customize and take advantage of features that aren't included in the base support of what's sort of laid there as groundwork for you. And those things can help differentiate commercial projects. And occasionally people have criticisms about the work that comes out of those engines. They're really focusing on the stuff that's really done in that duct tape and staples fashion, which maybe the developers hadn't had the commercial grade experience yet to realize just how much extra work that can seem invisible happens between what that is and what's commercially reasonable product. Because there are games made out of those engines as well as other engines, including Game Maker for that matter, that people have figured out that there's a way to use it, there's a deeper way to dig into it and rewrite the stuff that really, really is core to the experience to make it so it's not obvious at all that that's where it came from. That the performance is just breakneck fast. That it does things that no other games built with that engine or platform can do. And the people who are doing that are able to do that because they have an understanding of how it's doing what it's doing, enough of a foundation of it, and if and when those platform and technologies change and shift out from under them, they're not stuck any more than I was stuck than when kind of ActionScript and Flash got left behind, or when Objective-C got replaced, or when, again, like basically every technology I've worked on has eventually crumbled behind us. Meanwhile, these more generalizable things that people refer to, whether it's C++ or Java, there are so few games built, and I suspect I'll get some common hate for this, that are built in Java. Or there are so few games anymore for which C++ is really the optimal choice for the team size and level of investment of time, energy, or money available to the team at the scale that they're currently operating at, for which that is the optimal choice when prioritizing representational power, bang for their buck in terms of development time versus representational yield, in terms of being able to surface experiments for getting feedback, in terms of being able to iterate on their designs or distribute their work across the team. It's certainly powerful. There's no criticism of that, in the same way as it was powerful when I was doing assembly. But in ways that used to be necessary, occasionally I think we hear some people who they've been making games so long and been successful with it, certainly, but using approaches that used to be necessary in a way that modern machines are so powerful by comparison that you can really, without having to go that far down to the metal as even C++, still get some pretty breakneck performance out of engines that do a lot of stuff for us. Again, recognize the difference between what I'm calling duct tape and staples prototyping, rushed, get it playable on the screen just to see if it's good, versus really that level of polish, shine, refinement, paying attention to loading times and tricks around that, paying attention to streamlining frame rate and paying attention to draw calls and using LOD for every model and all these other things that we can do that do take extra work, a lot of additional work. There's always this difference between a commercial ready product and something which seems on the surface like it's the same game. That confuses sometimes when people do like open betas and stuff, where there's like a, maybe the main core gameplay seems to work after 6 months, and then for years it drags out and people are like, what are they doing? I already saw the game. I played the game at a conference, right? Like I've seen it. I know it exists. And they're not just building more levels and stuff. They are doing all that seemingly invisible work that really prepares something in a way that mainstream market sees it, plays it, doesn't give a second thought to what engine it's done in, because it's just so smooth, so fast, so consistent, so rapid between scenes. That work's possible in those engines. Those engines aren't stopping them from doing it. So, end of the day, Whatever programming language you start with will not be your last programming language. Whatever engine you are currently using or targeting to use after you start in something else will not be the last one you'll ever use. If you're going to be making games, you're going to be learning new things for the rest of your life. Changing platforms, changing programming languages, changing tools and technology and pipelines and processes, distribution models, markets, and so on. And that's how game development has always worked. Right? I mean, that's just the case. I knew people who designed arcade machines quite profitably at a time period when that was how that market worked. And when the industry changed to away from console or away from arcade stuff into console stuff, they just changed the work they were doing for console and carried forward them lessons, concepts, experiences, networking connections, all kinds of other useful things from that time period without having to be like, oh, well, this is different technology now. I'm stuck. And I think that there's this not giving enough credit to people that happens sometimes when we have this impression that whatever they see first, they're stuck on forever, that it's irreparable damage, that they can't go on and learn new things. And people are smart who are doing this. You got to give people some credit. They can shift platforms. They can take these concepts, learn that tool. Same thing as modelers or whatever. Is it 3D Studio? Is it Max? Is it Blender? Is it whatever it is? The skills they're learning to represent things. And yeah, there's a little bit of learning curve to pick up the tool. How do I do this thing that I knew it was called Lathe in 3D Studio. What's it called in Maya or whatever? They get over that, and within days, they're ramped up and doing amazing work. And the other thing, because they know how to think about it, because they got experience doing it. And that, at the end of the day, is what really counts. Doing it. Rather than getting held up on these questions that paralyze, that really slow down and just halt up beginners, worrying about like, oh, is it this the engine? Is that the platform? Is that the choice? Is this the whatever? It's like talked about in the other day's video. Having a plan, having a clarity, having an answer, helps them move past that point of being stuck. Of like, well, is this the right thing to be learning out of all things to be learning? It just freezes up so many people. And part of what we do with GameKeto is we narrow down those platforms, not because JavaScript on Canvas, HTML5 Canvas is the best, not because Unity, C# is the ultimate for every situation, but because it turns out they're kind of like, there's lots of apples and oranges out there. There's all have their pros and cons. You pick one, you go with it, you learn it, you get some depth in it. You don't just get stuck on the surface of hopping around, changing your mind every game, trying different technology, always on that sharp edge of the learning curve, never getting depth at the patterns of gameplay, at how teams communicate, how projects get pitched, planned, developed, released. That's the high level stuff that carries forward, and that happens from you've got to get your hands dirty building something. So that's how we do. Anyway, that's it for the day. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have another video for you all tomorrow. Bye for now.